Providence Municipal Court, Rhode Island. Case number 7834. A man in a faded army jacket grips the podium, prosthetic leg visible beneath worn khakis. He ran the light, Your Honor. I observed it clearly. Judge Caprio looks up. Sir, what branch did you serve? The defendant's voice tightens. 101st Airborne, Your Honor. 2 tours, Afghanistan. The courtroom shifts. Someone in the gallery clears their throat. And your leg? IED Kandahar, 2012. He swallows hard. His hands shake against the wood. Judge Caprio leans forward. Officer, you wrote here the defendant refused to comply with verbal commands. Is that accurate? Yes, Your Honor. The defendant speaks quietly. I'm partially deaf, sir, from the blast. Silence. The judge removes his glasses, rubs his eyes. Officer, we're going to have a conversation. The clerk had called the case minutes earlier, her voice cutting through the morning hum of Providence Municipal Court. Case number 7834, defendant Michael Reeves, failure to stop at a red light. The fine was listed at $150, plus court costs. Standard procedure for a traffic violation with officer testimony. Michael Reeves approached the podium slowly, each step deliberate, measured. The cane in his right hand tapped against the marble floor, a sound that seemed louder than it should be in the high-ceilinged courtroom. His army jacket, olive green and faded at the elbows, hung loose on his frame. The prosthetic leg was impossible to miss. Officer Chen stood at the side table, uniform crisp, notepad open. He'd been on the force for 6 years. Traffic violations were routine. Judge Caprio looked down from the bench, reading glasses perched on his nose. Mr. Reeves, you've pleaded not guilty. Is that correct? Yes, Your Honor. Michael's voice was steady but quiet. All right. Officer Chen, please present your testimony. The officer stepped forward, cleared his throat. Your Honor, on the night of February 8th at approximately 3:47 a.m., I was conducting routine patrol on Elmwood Avenue. I observed the defendant's vehicle, a 2008 Honda Civic, proceed through the intersection at Broad Street against a red signal light. Judge Caprio nodded. You're certain the light was red? Absolutely, Your Honor. I had a clear view. And what happened next? Officer Chen consulted his notes. I activated my lights and siren to initiate a traffic stop. The defendant did not pull over immediately. He continued driving for approximately 6 blocks before stopping in the parking lot of the VA Medical Center. The judge paused, pen hovering over his notepad. 6 blocks? Yes, Your Honor. Why 6 blocks, officer? I cannot speak to the defendant's reasoning, Your Honor. Judge Caprio glanced at Michael, who stood rigid at the podium. His knuckles were white where they gripped the cane. The judge's expression shifted, not suspicion, but curiosity. Mr. Reeves, would you like to explain what happened that night? Michael took a breath. I did go through the light, Your Honor. I'm not denying that. Were you aware it was red? A hesitation. I might have seen it. Everything was... He stopped, searching for words. I was heading somewhere important. Where were you going? Michael's jaw tightened. He looked down at the podium. I was trying to get help. Officer Chen interrupted. Your Honor, the defendant was also uncooperative at the scene. He refused to answer questions directly. Judge Caprio raised a hand gently. Officer, please, let him speak. He turned back to Michael. Take your time, Mr. Reeves. Michael swallowed hard. When he spoke again, his voice cracked slightly. I was having a bad night, Your Honor. A really bad night. The courtroom felt suddenly smaller. Someone in the gallery shifted in their seat. The judge leaned forward, waiting. Judge Caprio removed his glasses, folded them deliberately, and set them on the bench. He'd been doing this job long enough to recognize when a case was more than it appeared. "Mr. Reeves, what do you do for a living?" "I'm on disability, Your Honor." "What kind of disability?" "VA, service-connected." The judge nodded slowly. "Which branch did you serve in?" 101st Airborne, Your Honor. 2 deployments to Afghanistan. "And your disability, is it related to your service?" Michael's hand moved unconsciously to his left leg. "Yes, sir. IED blast in Kandahar, 2012. Lost partial hearing in my left ear. Lost most of my left leg below the knee." He tapped the prosthetic with his cane. "This is what's left." Judge Caprio's expression softened. "I see. And you received treatment at the VA?" "Yes, Your Honor. For the physical injuries and other things." "Other things?" Michael hesitated. The courtroom was quiet enough to hear the air conditioning hum. "PTSD, sir. I have episodes sometimes." "And that night, February 8th, where exactly were you going?" "The VA Emergency Psychiatric Unit." Michael's voice dropped almost to a whisper. "I was in crisis." The judge glanced at Officer Chen, then back to Michael. "What kind of crisis?" "Flashbacks, panic, I couldn't—" Michael stopped, closed his eyes briefly. "I couldn't tell what was real anymore. I needed help." Someone in the gallery cleared their throat. The clerk, who'd been typing mechanically, paused and looked up. Judge Caprio leaned back in his chair. "So you were driving yourself to get emergency psychiatric help at 3:47 in the morning?" "Yes, Your Honor." "And Officer Chen activated his lights behind you?" "Yes." "What went through your mind when you saw those lights?" Michael's hand trembled slightly on the cane. "I got scared. I don't know what I thought. In that state, everything feels like a threat. I just knew I needed to get to the VA." The judge picked up the officer's report, scanned it again, his brow furrowed. "Officer Chen, you followed Mr. Reeves for 6 blocks before he stopped. Is that correct?" "Yes, Your Honor." 6 blocks at 3:47 a.m., empty streets. And you didn't consider that perhaps this driver had an emergency?" Officer Chen stiffened. "I was assessing the situation, Your Honor, determining if it was safe to approach." "Safe to approach a man with a cane driving to a hospital?" "I didn't know his situation at the time, Your Honor." Judge Caprio set the report down and removed his reading glasses again, this time rubbing the bridge of his nose. It was a gesture those who knew him recognized. He was thinking, reconsidering, finding the human thread in the legal tangle. "Mr. Reeves, when Officer Chen finally stopped you in the VA parking lot, what happened?" "He approached my window, asked for license and registration." "Did you provide them?" "I tried, Your Honor. My hands were shaking pretty bad. I dropped my wallet twice." The judge looked at the officer. "Is that accurate?" Officer Chen nodded. "The defendant appeared to be having difficulty with fine motor control, yes. And you wrote in your report that he refused to comply with verbal commands." "What commands were those?" "I asked him to step out of the vehicle." "Did he step out?" "Eventually, yes. But there was a delay." Judge Caprio turned to Michael. "Why was there a delay?" Michael's voice was barely audible. "I was trying to explain. About my leg, about where I was going. But I couldn't get the words out right. And He stopped. "You what?" "I couldn't hear him very well, Your Honor. The blast damaged my hearing. When I'm stressed, it gets worse. Everything sounds muffled, far away. The room went very still. The clerk stopped typing entirely. In the gallery, someone leaned forward. "Officer Chen," Judge Caprio said carefully, "did Mr. Reeves tell you he was hard of hearing?" A pause. "He may have mentioned something, Your Honor." "He may have." It was a chaotic situation. At 3:47 a.m. in an empty parking lot? Officer Chen shifted his weight. He seemed agitated. I was following protocol for an uncooperative driver. Uncooperative or unable to hear you clearly? No answer. Judge Caprio leaned forward, elbows on the bench. His voice wasn't angry, it rarely was, but it carried weight. "Officer, did it occur to you to ask why this man was at the VA at 3:47 in the morning?" I asked where he was going. He didn't give a clear answer. Michael spoke up quietly. I tried to tell him. I said I needed help. He asked if I'd been drinking. The judge looked at Officer Chen. "Did you administer a sobriety test?" "No, Your Honor." "Why not?" "The defendant refused." Michael's head snapped up. "I didn't refuse. I told him I don't drink. I can't. My medication doesn't allow it." Judge Caprio opened the file again, pulling out a second page. He read it silently for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then he looked up at Officer Chen. "It says here in your report that the defendant appeared intoxicated or under the influence. But you didn't test him." "He refused, Your Honor." "Mr. Reeves, did you refuse a sobriety test?" "No, sir. I told him I have a medical condition. I told him about my leg. I told him I take medication for PTSD. He..." Michael stopped, struggling. He didn't seem to hear me either. The judge's tone shifted, gentler now. "What medication do you take, Mr. Reeves?" "Prazosin for nightmares, sertraline for anxiety, both prescribed by the VA." "Do either of those medications impair your ability to drive?" "No, Your Honor. They're supposed to help me function." "And that night, February 8th, were you under the influence of alcohol or any illegal substances?" "No, sir. I haven't had a drink in 4 years." Judge Caprio looked at Officer Chen. "Did you document that the defendant disclosed his medical conditions?" Another pause. I noted that he appeared agitated and uncooperative." "That's not what I asked. Did you document his medical disclosures?" "No, Your Honor." The judge set the papers down. He folded his hands on the bench and looked directly at Officer Chen. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath. "Officer, I'm going to ask you a question, and I want you to think very carefully before you answer." "Yes, Your Honor." "When you followed Mr. Reeves for 6 blocks, when you noted he was driving slowly and carefully to the VA medical center, when he tried to explain his hearing loss and his PTSD and his medication, did you at any point consider that you might be dealing with a veteran in crisis?" Officer Chen's face remained impassive. "I was following standard procedures for a traffic stop, Your Honor." "That's not what I asked." A long silence. Finally, "No, Your Honor. I did not consider that specifically." "And when he parked at the VA, a clear indication of where he was trying to go, did you ask if he needed medical assistance?" "I asked if he needed an ambulance." "What did he say?" "He said no." Michael spoke up, his voice strained. "I said I just needed to get inside, to check in at psychiatric emergency. He kept asking about the light, about why I didn't stop. I couldn't think straight." Judge Caprio removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. When he looked up again, there was something different in his expression. Not anger, but a deep, careful disappointment. Officer Chen, how long have you been on the force? 6 years, Your Honor. And in those 6 years, have you received training on interacting with individuals experiencing mental health crises? Yes, Your Honor. We have annual CIT training. CIT, that's Crisis Intervention Team Training, correct? Yes, sir. And what does that training teach you about someone who's driving to a hospital psychiatric unit at 3:47 in the morning? Officer Chen straightened. To assess for immediate danger and provide appropriate assistance. Did you provide assistance to Mr. Reeves? I issued a citation, Your Honor. A sound rippled through the gallery. Not quite laughter, not quite a gasp. Something in between. Judge Caprio looked at Michael, who stood with his shoulders slightly hunched, still gripping the podium. Mr. Reeves, after you received the citation, did you go inside to the psychiatric emergency unit? Yes, Your Honor. What happened there? Michael's voice was flat, exhausted. They admitted me for 72 hours. Observation, medication adjustment. So you were in crisis? Yes, sir. Serious enough to require a 3-day hospital stay? Yes. The judge turned back to Officer Chen. And during this entire interaction, from the moment you activated your lights to the moment you handed him a $150 ticket, did it occur to you that perhaps this was a situation that required compassion more than citation? I was doing my job, Your Honor. Your job, Judge Caprio repeated slowly. Let me tell you something, officer. I've been sitting on this bench for a long time. I've seen a lot of cases. And I can tell when someone is trying to do their job and when someone is just following a checklist. He picked up the report again. You wrote here that Mr. Reeves was uncooperative and possibly intoxicated. You noted that he refused verbal commands and delayed compliance. But nowhere in this entire report, did you mention that he was a disabled veteran driving himself to psychiatric emergency? I didn't know he was a veteran at first, Your Honor. But you knew he was going to the VA? Yes. And you knew he had a prosthetic leg? Yes. And you knew he was trying to explain something about his hearing? Officer Chen's jaw tightened. It was a confusing situation. Judge Caprio leaned back in his chair. For a moment, he just looked at both men, the officer standing straight in his uniform, the veteran leaning heavily on his cane. The courtroom felt suspended in time. Mr. Reeves, the judge said quietly, I want you to understand something. You did run that red light. That's a fact. Michael nodded. I know, Your Honor. But context matters. In this court, context always matters. He paused. You were in crisis. You were trying to get help. And instead of receiving help, instead of being treated as a human being in distress, you were treated as a problem to be processed. Michael's eyes glistened. He looked down at the podium. Do you still drive? Yes, Your Honor, I have to. For appointments, for work when I can manage it. And since that night, since February 8th, have you had any other traffic violations? No, sir. Any other incidents with law enforcement? No, Your Honor. Judge Caprio made a note. Then he looked at Officer Chen. Officer, I want to ask you something, and I want an honest answer. Yes, Your Honor. If Mr. Reeves had been a young woman driving to the hospital in labor, would you have handled the situation differently? Officer Chen opened his mouth, closed it. Possibly, Your Honor. Possibly, the judge repeated. Here's what I think, officer. I think you saw a traffic violation and you responded to it. I don't think you saw a person. I don't think you saw a veteran. I don't think you saw someone who served this country and came home broken. His voice remained steady, calm. And that's the problem. The courtroom was absolutely silent. Even the clerk had stopped moving. Your Honor, Officer Chen began. Judge Caprio held up a hand. I'm not finished. He picked up a pen, tapped it against the bench. In your report, you wrote that Mr. Reeves appeared agitated. Of course he was agitated. He was having a psychiatric emergency. You wrote that he delayed compliance. Of course he delayed. He couldn't hear you properly and was trying to explain his medical conditions. You wrote that he seemed possibly intoxicated. But you didn't test him because he refused. Except he didn't refuse. He tried to explain his medication. Officer Chen's face had gone pale. I understand, Your Honor. Do you? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you wrote a report that justified your actions rather than documented what actually happened. Judge Caprio set down his pen and folded his hands. The air in the courtroom felt heavy, expectant. He looked at Michael Reeves, who stood quietly at the podium, and then at Officer Chen, whose shoulders had gone rigid. Officer, I'm going to tell you something my father told me when I was young. He served in Korea, came home with shrapnel in his leg and nightmares that lasted decades. The judge's voice softened. He told me that the hardest part of war isn't the fighting. It's coming home and realizing that the person you were doesn't exist anymore. You're someone new, someone broken in ways that don't show up on X-rays. Michael's head lifted slightly. He was listening. My father struggled. He drank too much. He couldn't hold a job. He'd wake up screaming. And you know what helped him? People who saw him as a person, not a problem. People who understood that his behavior wasn't defiance. It was survival. The judge paused, letting the words settle. Mr. Reeves, he continued, thank you for your service. I mean that sincerely. What you went through in Afghanistan, what you're still going through, matters. It matters in this courtroom. Michael's voice was hoarse. Thank you, Your Honor. Judge Caprio turned to Officer Chen. And officer, I want to be very clear. I'm not questioning your commitment to public safety. I'm not saying you acted with malice. But I am saying you missed an opportunity to serve with compassion. And in a job like yours, in a job like mine, compassion isn't optional. It's essential. Officer Chen nodded stiffly. I understand, Your Honor. Do you? The judge's tone wasn't harsh, just honest. Because if you'd taken 5 minutes, just 5 minutes, to really listen to Mr. Reeves, we wouldn't be here today. He would have gotten the help he needed without the added burden of a $150 fine and a court date. The officer said nothing. Judge Caprio looked down at the file one more time. He seemed to be weighing something, considering. When he looked up, his expression was resolute. I have 6 words for you, Officer Chen. The courtroom held its breath. Michael gripped his cane tighter. The clerk's fingers hovered over her keyboard. Did you serve your oath today? Silence. Complete, profound silence. Officer Chen's face went from pale to flushed. Your Honor, Your oath, the judge repeated quietly. To protect and serve. Did you protect Mr. Reeves that night? Did you serve him? No answer. I'll take your silence as a no. Judge Caprio opened a different folder on his bench, scanned a document, then closed it. He looked at Michael Reeves, whose eyes were now visibly wet, though he hadn't let the tears fall. Mr. Reeves, let me tell you what I see here. I see a violation, yes. You went through a red light. That's documented, and I can't ignore it. He paused. But I also see a man who served his country honorably. A man who came home with injuries, visible and invisible. A man who, on the worst night, did exactly what he should have done. He tried to get help. Michael nodded, not trusting his voice. You drove yourself to the VA psychiatric emergency. You didn't hurt anyone. You didn't endanger anyone. You were moving slowly, carefully, trying desperately to reach safety. The judge's voice grew firmer. And instead of being met with help, you were met with suspicion. In the gallery, someone murmured agreement. The clerk glanced up, then back down. So, here's what I'm going to do. Judge Caprio picked up his pen. I'm dismissing this citation entirely. No fine, no points, nothing on your record. Michael's knees seemed to buckle slightly. He gripped the podium with both hands. Your Honor, You don't need to say anything. The judge smiled gently. You've been through enough. This court isn't here to add to your burden. Thank you, Michael whispered. Thank you. Judge Caprio made a notation in the file. I'm also going to add something to the record. A note that states you cooperated fully during this hearing, and that the circumstances of the violation were extraordinary and mitigating. If anyone ever questions this, that note will explain why the citation was dismissed. Michael wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. His shoulders, which had been hunched and tense since he'd entered the courtroom, finally began to relax. One more thing, the judge added. I want you to know that you were right to go to the VA that night. You were right to ask for help. That takes courage. More courage than most people will ever understand. It didn't feel like courage, Your Honor. It felt like desperation. Sometimes they're the same thing. Michael nodded. He managed a small, exhausted smile. Yes, sir. Judge Caprio glanced at Officer Chen, who stood motionless. Officer, you're dismissed. But before you leave, I'd like you to stay for a moment. The officer nodded. Yes, Your Honor. Michael Reeves took a step back from the podium, then hesitated. Your Honor, may I say something? Of course. He turned slightly, looking at Officer Chen. I'm not angry at you. I just want you to know that. His voice was steady now, clearer. That night, I wasn't thinking straight. I know I must have seemed strange, difficult. I get it. Officer Chen met his eyes. I appreciate that, sir. But I also need you to understand that people like me, veterans dealing with this stuff, we're trying. Every day, we're trying. And sometimes, we just need someone to see that we're trying. The officer nodded slowly. I hear you. Good. Michael turned back to the judge. Thank you again, Your Honor. This means more than you know. You're welcome, Mr. Reeves. Judge Caprio watched as Michael walked toward the exit, the tap of his cane echoing through the courtroom. The prosthetic leg moved stiffly but steadily. At the door, Michael paused, turned back, and gave a small nod, a gesture of respect, of gratitude, of relief. Then he was gone. Judge Caprio waited until the door closed before speaking to Officer Chen. His voice was lower now, meant only for the officer and the immediate court. Officer Chen, I'm not going to officially reprimand you. That's not what this moment is about. He leaned forward. But I am going to ask you to do something. Yes, Your Honor. I want you to think about what happened here today. Really think about it. And the next time you stop someone, anyone, I want you to remember Mr. Reeves. Remember that behind every violation is a person. Behind every mistake is a story. Officer Chen stood straighter. I will, Your Honor. I believe you will. The judge made a note in his file. I'm also recommending additional CIT training for your unit, not as punishment, as investment. You and your fellow officers deal with people in crisis every day. You should have the tools to recognize that. I agree, Your Honor. Good. Judge Caprio closed the file. That's all. You're dismissed. Officer Chen nodded, turned, and walked toward the exit. His steps were measured, deliberate. He didn't look back. The courtroom exhaled collectively. The clerk resumed typing. Someone in the gallery shifted in their seat. The judge sat quietly for a moment, pen in hand, staring at the closed file. Sometimes, he said, almost to himself, mercy is the only justice that makes sense. The clerk called the next case, and the courtroom rhythm resumed. But something had shifted in the air, a subtle recalibration of what this space meant, what it could be. People in the gallery whispered to each other, pointing at the empty podium where Michael Reeves had stood. One woman wiped her eyes. A man in a Veterans of Foreign Wars cap nodded approvingly. Judge Caprio glanced at the next file, but his mind was still on the case he'd just finished. It wasn't the first time a veteran had stood before him. It wouldn't be the last. But each time, it reminded him why he'd wanted this job in the first place. Not to punish, but to understand. Not to enforce blindly, but to see clearly. The next defendant approached the podium, a young woman with an expired parking meter. Standard stuff, routine. But before addressing her, Judge Caprio looked up at Officer Chen's empty chair and the officer's report still sitting on the side table. He made a mental note to follow up on the training recommendation. Maybe it would help. Maybe it wouldn't. But it was worth trying. Because if Michael Reeves had taught him anything in these past 15 minutes, it was that trying, even when it felt impossible, was sometimes the bravest thing a person could do. The woman at the podium cleared her throat nervously. Your Honor, Take your time, he said gently, offering her the same grace he'd offered Michael. What happened? She began her explanation. Something about a doctor's appointment running late, about losing track of time, about the meter expiring while she was still inside. Simple. Human. Understandable. Judge Caprio listened. Really listened. And as he listened, he thought about Officer Chen and about Michael Reeves and about all the moments in between. The small, invisible chances people had every day to choose compassion over procedure, understanding over enforcement. He thought about his father, who'd come home from Korea a different man. He thought about all the veterans who walked through these doors, carrying burdens that courtrooms could never fully address. And he thought about what justice really meant in a place like this. Not blind adherence to the law, but clear-eyed recognition of humanity. All right, he said to the woman, once she'd finished her story. Let me ask you something. What do you do for a living? And the rhythm continued. Question, answer, understanding. One case at a time. An hour later, the courtroom took a brief recess. Judge Caprio stepped down from the bench and walked to his chambers, carrying the files from the morning's cases. He set them on his desk and sat down heavily in his chair. His clerk knocked and entered. That was a tough one, Judge. Michael Reeves? Yes. Did you mean what you said about the training? Every word. He leaned back, folding his hands behind his head. We can't keep treating people in crisis like criminals. It's not right. The clerk nodded. The gallery was moved. I heard several people talking about it afterward. Good. Maybe one of them will remember it the next time they encounter someone struggling. He smiled faintly. That's how things change, you know. One conversation at a time. Do you think Officer Chen will take it to heart? Judge Caprio considered. I don't know. I hope so. He's young. He can still learn. He paused. But even if he doesn't, Mr. Reeves will remember. And maybe that's enough. Maybe knowing that someone saw him, really saw him, will help. You think he'll be all right? I think he's fighting. And as long as you're fighting, there's hope. The clerk placed a fresh cup of coffee on his desk. You want to review the afternoon docket before we start again? Give me 5 minutes. You got it, Judge. She left, closing the door quietly behind her. Judge Caprio sat alone in his chambers, surrounded by case files and law books and the accumulated weight of thousands of decisions made over decades. He thought about Michael Reeves, about the way his hands had shaken on the podium, the way his voice had cracked when talking about his daughter's name. Sophia. No, wait. That was a different case, a different story. Michael hadn't mentioned a daughter. He'd mentioned nightmares, flashbacks, the sound of an IED blast that still echoed in his damaged hearing. The judge rubbed his temples. Sometimes the cases blurred together, not because he didn't care, but because there were so many. So many people carrying so much pain, and all he could do was try to meet each one with the same attention, the same compassion, the same willingness to see the person behind the paperwork. It was exhausting. But it was also the most important work he'd ever done. He took a sip of coffee, opened the afternoon docket, and prepared to do it all again. That evening, after the courthouse had emptied and the last case had been decided, Judge Caprio walked to his car in the parking lot. The February air was cold, biting. He pulled his coat tighter and fumbled for his keys. As he approached his car, he noticed someone standing near the entrance to the building. At first, he didn't recognize the figure. Just a man in an army jacket, leaning against a pillar. Then the man turned, and Judge Caprio saw the cane. Michael Reeves. The judge changed direction, walking toward him. Mr. Reeves, is everything all right? Michael straightened, a bit embarrassed. Yes, Your Honor. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. I was just waiting to catch you. If that's okay. Of course it's okay. What's on your mind? Michael shifted his weight, the cane adjusting. I wanted to thank you again, properly. I've been standing here trying to figure out what to say, and I still don't have the right words. Judge Caprio smiled. You don't need the right words. A thank you is enough. It's not, though. Michael looked down at the ground, then back up. Do you know what it's like to feel invisible? To feel like no one sees you, like you're just a problem to be solved or avoided? I can imagine. That's how I've felt since I came home. Like I'm a ghost moving through the world, bothering people with my existence. His voice was steady now, but full of emotion. But today, you saw me. You saw me. And that matters more than the dismissed ticket. More than anything. Judge Caprio felt a tightness in his chest. Mr. Reeves, you're not a ghost. You're a human being who went through hell and came out the other side. That deserves to be seen. It deserves to be honored. Michael nodded. I just wanted you to know what you did today. You gave me something I haven't felt in a long time. What's that? Dignity. The word hung in the cold air between them. Judge Caprio extended his hand, and Michael shook it firmly. Two men, generations apart, connected by a moment of recognition. You take care of yourself, Mr. Reeves. I will, Your Honor. I promise. Michael turned and walked toward the parking lot, his cane tapping rhythmically against the pavement. Judge Caprio watched him go until he disappeared into the shadows between the streetlights. Then he got in his car and drove home, carrying the weight of the day's decisions. The victories, the compromises, the moments when justice and mercy had aligned perfectly. Providence Municipal Court opened again the next morning at 9 o'clock sharp. The gallery filled with defendants and their families, lawyers shuffling papers, officers waiting to testify. The clerk prepared her files. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Judge Caprio took his seat at the bench, adjusted his glasses, and looked out at the assembled crowd. Somewhere in that mix of faces were stories he hadn't heard yet, struggles he didn't know about, crises that would only reveal themselves through careful questioning. The clerk called the first case, a parking violation. The defendant approached nervously. "Good morning," Judge Caprio said warmly. "How are you doing today?" And so it began again. Another day, another series of small violations that often pointed to larger truths. The machinery of justice turning, grinding through the routine work of a municipal court. But something had changed, not in the system, but in the people who'd witnessed yesterday's exchange. Word spread quickly in the courthouse. The story of the veteran and the 6 words traveled from clerk to officer to lawyer to defendant. People talked about it in the hallways, in the parking lot, at dinner tables that evening. Did you hear what Judge Caprio said? About serving your oath? Yeah, powerful stuff. And maybe, just maybe, someone who heard that story would remember it at the next time they encountered a person in crisis. Maybe they'd pause before judging. Maybe they'd ask one more question. Maybe they'd choose compassion. That was the hope, anyway. In the courtroom, Judge Caprio worked through the morning docket. Expired registrations, unpaid parking tickets, a noise complaint. Each case received his full attention, his genuine curiosity, his willingness to see beyond the surface violation to the human being standing before him. At one point, he paused between cases and looked up at the American flag in the corner of the courtroom. He thought about his father, about Michael Reeves, about all the veterans who served and came home changed. He thought about the covenant between a country and its soldiers, a promise that their sacrifice would be honored, their struggles recognized, their humanity protected. Sometimes that covenant was broken, but not here, not in this courtroom, not if he could help it. The clerk called the next case, and Judge Caprio returned his attention to the podium. A woman with a cane approached. Different cane, different person, different story, but the same careful attention, the same willingness to listen, the same belief that justice without compassion was just bureaucracy with a gavel. "How are you doing today?" he asked. She smiled nervously. "Better now, Your Honor." "Good. Let's see what we can do to help." Outside, the February sun broke through the clouds. Inside, the courtroom continued its work. One case at a time, one question at a time, one moment of human connection at a time. And somewhere in Providence, Michael Reeves was going about his day, driving carefully, attending his appointments, carrying his burdens a little more lightly than before. Because someone had seen him, really seen him. And that, in the end, was justice.